Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that speak to a diverse set of topics, trying to help maybe shine the light on some things that we may not know that can help our business, but then also maybe trying to bring some help to those things that keep us up at night where we can, be a little bit more successful, have a little bit more time for ourselves. Today, we're lucky to have Mike Gibson. He is a facilitator and instructional designer. He develops and presents materials for live classes and online classes. He's been writing and teaching for 25 years and has facilitated training across multiple organizational levels in corporations, municipalities, and not-for-profits. And that is probably, I'm not going to speak for him, but say that's probably the impetus for writing his latest book, Big Presentations in Small Rooms: Know Your Audience, Know Your Message, and Make the Connection. And just so you know, I do have a copy for myself. I've been looking through this. Mike, first off, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, man. It is so good to be here. It's great to connect with you and also to connect with your audience. I look forward to being able to share some helpful information today.
Yeah, and the other cool thing is Mike is just across town. We actually both live in Fort Worth, Texas, so that's pretty cool. I don't run into. I've got guests from all over the world, but I think you may be the first from Fort Worth here, so that's awesome.
Yes.
Well, I told a little bit of your story, but before I'm telling you, we had a little pre-show discussion, and we've had a couple talks before, and I'm really excited about this. There's a lot of things to talk about. But before we do that, talk a little bit about how you got into this, the instructional design and focusing on presentations, and then also a little bit, really what spurred you to write the book.
Okay, good. Yes, well, I have been teaching all of my adult life, and part of the way that I am wired leads me to look at whatever I'm given in terms of materials and immediately ask, how could this be better? And of course, I'm wired to present in a specific way,
Right.
and I want to stay true to my personality and my approach. And not all curricula is created to suit me. And so I got into instructional design simply because I wanted to present material that matched my priorities, but also matched the way that I like to teach. So I have never been one just to be a plug and play type person. Life might be easier for me if I were more that type of a person.
Right.
But I love to take things and make them better. Well, thankfully, that became recognized as a talent. And so organizations I would work with would say, would you do for other curriculum sets what you did for this one? Okay. So that was the beginning of my experience with instructional design, was just doing what I would naturally do to prepare for a presentation, and then do that really for other facilitators and teachers as well.
Okay. Well, I think it's been highlighted the last year, of course, with Zoom meetings. It's like everything's been on a deck, and it's like presentation after presentation, which I personally, I like it. I'm not a Zoom fatiguer. I like being on it. I think because I can have more concise meetings, get the points across with some end times. Whereas sometimes when you meet in person, things linger, get out of control. But so anyway, but I think it's really shed a light on, the presentation and process. So I think timely guest to have you on, because I feel like we're going to continue to do more and more of this. I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. We may not be doing as much, but I still think the need for it. And just that, even if you're in person, that crisp, clear, decisive messaging.
Yes, I think that's good. And it will be interesting to see in years to come how this experience shapes the live experience and makes it even better, specifically regarding what the audience is seeing on a screen. So I think you're
Right.
onto something.
Yeah.
It's good to take a learner's mindset and to be always thinking, what is this teaching me
Right.
that I could use in other settings as well? And I think you're right. I think presentations will hopefully become better because of this need to
Right.
make them better for this virtual Zoom meeting type environment. So I'm excited today to talk about that, to
Yeah.
talk about slide development and things that we can do that will make that visual element of our presentation even better.
Yeah, and I think the three caveats that you have on the cover of the book, that know your audience, know your message, and make the connection. I don't think you really could have been much more concise about that, because those are the three keys. I mean, we have to know what we're presenting, and there's nothing worse than being in a presentation where the speaker is fumbling through because they just didn't know what, or they didn't do enough
Right.
research to get to where they need to be. And then also the audience is important, and then make that connection. I mean, it's so important to connect with the audience, because you look around a lot of times, and I don't notice it as much on Zoom, but when you're in live meetings, like, people be check and see if they polished their shoes this morning, or if they got the same color shoes on, or it's this, your mind can wander if you don't
Yes.
or if you're not engaged. So let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We're going to go way back, because this morning, as I was drinking my coffee thinking about this interview, I got taken back to not that long ago in my lifetime, where we had transparencies. And you actually, for those that don't know, it's like it's a hard piece of plastic, kind of like almost a piece of paper, but you wrote on it, put it on this overhead projector that illuminated on the wall. And it's like, it was difficult, because if you had 10 transparencies and you decided to reshift some information, guess what? You got to start all over again. And so then I guess I feel like we kind of came into the PowerPoint world, and then it was about the gee whiz and all the gimmicks that you could make text fly in and blind away, and just, I mean, you could spend hours and hours just the trickery of it all. And then,
Right.
then we kind of moved into this, oh my gosh, I'm tired of all that. Let's just get to the black and white of, you know, words in black, white background, get your message across. And I know that the reality is there's somewhere in the middle there to
Yes.
be engaging, and to get your message. So I'm gonna let you pick a point where
Yes.
you want to start with all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's start at this foundational level that you've already alluded to. That the purpose of the presentation is to reflect the fact that you know your stuff, you
Right.
know your audience, and you're determined to make that connection. So your presentation should support those goals. It should support your message. The And when I say presentation, I'm thinking in terms of your message. So your slide deck, maybe we should make sure we have our terminology clear.
Okay. Okay.
Your slide deck should be to support your message. Your
Right.
slide deck should not be your message. So if someone could read through your slide deck and know everything that you're going to say, you've created a redundancy.
Right.
So
Right.
do you need to be there, or does your slide deck need to be
Yeah, we
there?
could have just emailed that to you, and you could read that in your spare time.
Yes, and that is a common source of frustration in the business world. Is
Yes.
I had to come to this meeting and sit and listen to the presenter read their slide deck to me.
Right.
I could have read it a lot faster on my own and
Yeah.
got on about my business. So
Right.
it's not to be your presentation. Another way we could say that is your slide deck is not to be your script.
Right.
You should not be reading your presentation to the audience. Your slide deck should not be your handout. If you have a handout containing a lot of detailed information, let it be just that.
Right.
a
Right.
PDF that you send out or a printout on paper that you have to give to them, but protect that slide deck so that it can function truly as a support
Yeah.
for your message. So it makes perfect sense given what you're going to say,
Yeah.
but it should not be able to stand alone without you even being there.
Right. Yeah, and I think I was just thinking, so, what are some of our messages? I mean, most of the time we're trying to sell somebody on something. It's like we're either trying to sell our product or our service to you as my prospect. We're trying to sell an idea to maybe upper management or to our team. I guess there are times that maybe we report on the state of affairs where
Right.
it's more
Yeah.
just like, here's what's happening. And then we also
Yeah.
think about like, uh, results. If we did sell you, if I did sell you a project as the worker, then it's like now I'm reporting on how this is going. So I
Right.
guess we kind of have to start with what is our message that we really want. I guess not
Yes.
the actual words or context of the message, but what is that overall thing? I need to get you to start buying into what I'm telling you.
Right. That's good. Have that goal in mind. What's the purpose of my message? And then make sure that your slide deck is supporting that purpose. So if it is informational, then it's going to make more sense that there will be more data involved in that presentation. However, that does not mean that all the data needs to be on the same slide.
Right. Right.
Or all the data, 100% of it has to be on screen. There might be some of it that can be given in a different format, digitally or on paper. So we're making sure that what we provide for the audience is going to best meet their need, where they have the information that they need to understand a current situation or to make a decision regarding what will be the future
Yeah.
situation. So I think you're wise in pointing out there are these different reasons for presentations.
Yeah.
So this isn't a one size fits all approach.
Right.
You need to make sure that what you're doing meets the audience needs.
Yeah.
However, there are a few guidelines that we can follow
Okay.
that will help us meet a wide variety of needs.
Right. Right.
So, for example, the size of the text on the screen. That's an important thing. In my world, in the big presentations in small rooms that I have delivered and trainings that I've delivered, I've discovered that a general rule is to not have a font size smaller than 28. And usually the upper end was around 44. But the upper end can expand depending on what the need is.
Right.
So if you really want to emphasize something, you could have you could have a 76 size font, uh, if it helps you meet the needs of the audience.
Right.
But I would say that same thing's not going to hold true on the other end of the spectrum. If you get much below 28, then you're losing effectiveness probably in two ways. One way you're losing effectiveness is that people are distracted because they're having to squint,
Right.
or you see them pulling out their glasses, or they're just having trouble physically reading the information that's there. That's one way. Another thing you may be running into is if you're getting much below 28, you have to ask yourself why am I tempted to use such a small font size? It might be that you have too much
Yeah.
text on your screen,
Trying
and
to
that's the
cram too
reason.
much on the page. I've
There
done.
we
Yeah. I
go.
know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So general rules like that can help you. Also, another general rule is to think of, like, if you are creating your slide deck on a laptop, think about how big your screen is. Is it a 17-inch screen, a 21-inch screen? Create your slide, put it up full screen, and step back from your laptop the number of feet that your laptop is wide or
Yeah.
big. So, for example, you got a 17-inch screen, step back 17 feet from your
Oh,
screen,
wow.
see if you can read it. If
Okay.
so, then you're probably going to be
Interesting.
okay. And probably what you'll find is that 28 to 44 size font will come into play with that. Now that tip about stepping away from the screen, the number of feet that your screen is in inches, is from a resource by Nancy Duarte called Slideology, which is, I mean, this is like my Bible for slide design. She has another book more about visual storytelling called Resonate,
Yep.
and then came out with a third book that's kind of a combination of the two. So if you want both, then I'd look for that. I think it's HBR produced that. It's a combination of the two.
Okay.
Great resource. So Nancy Duarte, if you search her, man, she's got tons of material out there. That's her specialty, is visuals for presentations. And she's the one who talked about back up from the screen, see if you can still read it. So you want your text, that's a big general rule. You want your text to be readable from wherever the audience is going
Right.
to be.
Yeah.
There have been times when, if it were a larger room than what I was used to, as soon as I got the projection up, I would go to the very back of the room, make sure that I could read it.
Yeah, and that's a good point that I don't hear it as much as I used to, but I would always go check out the room if possible, because it, to me, it matters if you're presenting in a broom closet versus an auditorium with 500 people. And not only, I think, not only for the size and the visuals, but, it also kind of got me prepared, because there's nothing worse than, well, it works both ways. You show up for a presentation and you're thinking 100 people and there's three, or you show up thinking there's three and there's 100.
Right.
So it, to me, it's I guess it's just part of my getting ready for it. It's always good.
Yeah, that's good. And most of the time, those things are fairly easy to check out.
Yeah.
What's the room going to be like? Do I have access to the room ahead of time? How many people do we think are going to be there? And even if there is a sense of continuity, like you've done a presentation here for this company, or maybe it's your own workplace, where presentations happen, they happen in the meeting room.
Right. Right.
Being able to confirm that that's where it's going to happen this time might be helpful, because it might be that meeting room was booked and they have to move you to a much bigger or a much smaller room just because of scheduling.
Yeah, we'll say not only we'll take presentations off the table and just say that it will help to show up in the right place with the great presentation. Don't be standing outside the wrong conference room door waiting to get in and find out, oh yeah, well, we moved that 3 floors down.
Right. Well, I've had that happen because the organization that I was doing training for sent me to the wrong room.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm in there. I have my stuff set up and wondering why no one's showing up, and then make a few quick phone calls and realize there's 20 people waiting for me 3 floors up.
I don't know. For me, that's just the very worst, because now you kind of get all, you get all nervous, not nervous, but you're just, you're in a hurry, you're rushed, and it's like things just tend to go bad from there.
Wow. Yeah. You have to take such a humble approach to things like that. Because for me, it was the people who hired me that sent me to the wrong place.
Right.
So I'm not going to throw them under the bus. They hired me. I want to honor them, which means I kind of have to take the blame for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
Even though that's where I was sent. And try to be as humble and positive and move forward as quickly as possible in situations like that. So listeners, man, if you have something like that happen, make sure you're protecting those, even those who may have sent you to the wrong place, because you want to guard that relationship, because you're going to have to work with them, or maybe they are your true customer in that situation.
Exactly. Yeah, so I didn't mean to get off topic and interrupt. If you had some more, general points that you wanted to cover after the screen and stepping back. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Okay, yeah, no, that was a fun tangent with a good story behind it. So we've got text is something to keep in mind. Make sure that text is visible. Of course, many times images can be helpful.
Yes.
But we want to be careful with those images. It's good if you can have a simple and powerful image that helps support your idea.
Yeah.
So whatever's on the screen behind you should make perfect sense given what you're saying. They shouldn't be wondering why it doesn't seem to match what he's saying and what's on the screen. That should flow together easily.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about taking on a challenge and you have a mountain climber on the scene behind you, that makes sense, because we're talking about taking on a challenge. So you want to make sure that those things work together. There was a time, we're getting away from this, but there was a time when we would make the image smaller than it needed to be,
Yeah.
because, and then we would make the point of the image in text instead of just relying on the image to communicate on its own, which it should be able to do.
Right.
And if it's supporting your message, you should be the one making the connection verbally,
Right.
not having them read that connection off of the screen.
And I was going to ask you, I've seen some presentations more geared towards, we'll talk probably a little bit more about this in depth in a minute, but, the old rule, I guess, was, about 5 bullet points that you could read. Don't write sentences out, but they should be more captions. And then I've seen where some are, like you said, it's just a slide with a picture, and then you just wrap words around the picture.
Right.
I guess that's easier if you're telling a story or trying to
Yes.
sell. But
Yes.
if it's data laden where you have to have numbers, there's not much way you can get around that. But the other thing
Right.
is, so about uh, personalizing images, if you can. I don't know. I'll put this as a question, but
Okay.
like when I talk about blogging, I always say it's always better if you can personalize it with a picture of you. It helps the your people, audience, prospects, whoever, connect with you. If you're a dog lover and you like to go out in the trails, and a cool picture of you and your dog in the trails, if it matches the story, is good. And so how is that, like, if I'm pitching a new product and maybe I've got Joe makes that product and I got a picture of him holding the prototype versus some
Right.
stock image off of wherever.
Yes. Yes. Good observation there. Good question.
Yeah.
It goes back to knowing your message, knowing your audience, and making the connection.
Yeah.
Does that image help those things happen? And it might be that having, the person who designed a product in the image with the product, especially if it's something that's in-house, look what we did.
Right.
And it also shines a spotlight on the person, the developer of this product, kind of setting them up to be able to be like the hero of this part of the story. That's
Right.
a good thing. Images that involve ourselves, I think we need to be careful with, because we don't want the audience to think that we're trying to make this message about us.
Right. Right.
We want the message to the goal of the message to stay forefront in our minds.
Right.
And so all images should help lead toward that. So if an image that involves us helps lead toward that, that's fine. But make sure you are in no way creating an impression, even if it's a false impression, that you're trying to make this all about you.
Right.
Because people will become cynical pretty quickly
Right.
and not want to listen
Yeah.
to you as much.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So while we're on images, what about videos? When YouTube came up, that became a big thing, but then all of a sudden it was like trying to make them work. It became,
right.
even though the
Yeah.
best laid plans, hey, I tested this at home, and then you get up in front of everybody, and then either the internet connection is bad or the video doesn't play, or what about
Yes,
videos?
yes. So two observations about video usage. One is anytime a new form of communication becomes easily accessible, it's easy for it to be abused.
Right.
Kind of like we were talking about earlier when PowerPoint first came into being, and there's all these different bells and whistles attached to it. People felt the need to use them all, even though they were more of a distraction than a help. A
Right.
similar thing can happen with video. So we want to keep that high standard. Does the video support the message? The second thing is that if you're going to use a video, download it to your hard drive. Do not rely on any kind of internet connection
Yeah.
to uh, be able to share it with your audience,
Yeah.
because that's something you don't have total control of.
Right. Right.
So whenever I'm using a video, I always figure out a way to have it on my hard drive and figure out a way to have it. So all I have to do is click next on my clicker or, a presentation remote, and it plays. So we
Yeah.
want it to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some presenters distract from their message because they get to the video and they're like, oh, I got to go walk around behind my laptop and, move the mouse around the screen to hit play. when it's not that much effort
Yeah.
uh, to just make it the next animation. You click it, it plays,
Yeah.
and you're good to go.
And you bring up a good point. It's like everything, every time you talk about something, you bring up another good point. We'll get back to the overview here in a little bit, I promise. But
Sure.
you bring up a clicker, and I've got one that's, I don't know, it probably cost 10-15 bucks years ago. It's reasonably priced, but I like to walk around, depending on the
Oh
if
yeah,
you're in front
yeah,
of a like a I don't know what, like more of a theater where people are seated and looking at you. It's a little, you can move side to side a little bit more.
right.
But if it's a conference room, I kind of like to walk around as I'm talking and click, because and I guess there's a happy medium, because sometimes you see people standing up at the front and it's, head head, head down pushing buttons, and I don't, to me, it's not engaging, even though their
Right.
message, it's distracting, and I don't feel like they're engaging with me. So what's
Yes,
the,
yes.
what do you think about that, about the roving around, the clickers versus standing at the front of a room, head down punching some buttons?
Right. Yes, yes. The I think the key of what you're talking about here is engagement. You want to be connecting with the audience.
Right.
And anything that comes between you and the audience can function as a barrier, whether that's your laptop on a stand, or in some places they may even have a big old podium
Right.
where all the audience can see is from your shoulders up.
Right.
It's a massive visual barrier. So I like to, my preference is to move away from those barriers as much as possible.
Okay.
And if I need to reference my screen, um, then I try to have it set in a way where I don't have to be behind it to see it.
Right.
Like I may have it setting at an angle where all I have to do is look to my diagonally to my left to glance at it and then keep presenting. And for some people, the business presentations they are having to deliver were by necessity created in a short amount of time, simply because the flow of the business, things are moving so fast. We need this information, and some of it may be data heavy. So they are having to refer to information.
Right.
It's just the reality that they're dealing with.
Right.
I would encourage them to make the most of the presenter notes part of their program, and have their information there, and then have that their laptop set up in a way that it can function as a monitor. So all they have to do is glance over at it to see the next section of information that they need to share with their audience, and try to avoid standing behind it and just reading from those notes as much as possible. As much as possible, you want to do that,
Yeah.
given the reality that you have to deal with. Um, Try to be as engaging as possible, given the information and how much you have to visually access it in order to stay accurate. Because some things that are number heavy, you do not want to say the wrong numbers. So
Right.
you're having to be very careful with that. And
Okay.
so it might be that you're even telling the audience, hey, I want to make sure that every number I tell you is accurate. So you'll see me referring to this information because I want to make sure
Yeah.
that it is presented accurately. And they'll understand that.
Yeah, and I think that's another good point you bring up about, the open and honesty with the audience, things like that. It doesn't hurt. It's there's no magic behind this. Everybody knows how to do it, and just saying, hey, look, maybe some fresh numbers are coming in. Came in last
Right.
night or this morning that I'm going to have to refer to this, and it. I think it just lets people know the reason why, not that you're not prepared, but there's
Right.
just some other stuff going on. And it's kind of like myself. I take notes as we go through this, and I always tell guests. I don't think we talked about it, but I usually tell guests, look, I'm not texting in my lunch order. While I'm doing this, I'm actually taking
Taking
notes.
notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I definitely learn a lot off of this. So, uh, anyway, a lot of great information. You want to go back to your overview point? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
just talked
No.
about a couple other things I thought were very pertinent there.
One more thing to add there.
Mhm.
Um, if you're having to access information to share with the audience, another way that you can create an engagement with them is to be accessing things from a different source. So if you have some information that you're accessing on the screen in your presenter notes, you may have other information in print. So you can say, hey, I want to share this with you. And
Yeah.
just your act of picking this thing up and accessing the information in a different way
Yeah.
is something that helps hold the audience interest. Because, oh, okay, so he's going to, it's just a simple thing, but it's movement and action and you accessing information in a different way. And there's something about reading something from paper that is a different vibe than reading something from a screen.
Right.
So you can take advantage of that difference as you connect with your audience.
Well, and
Uh,
that leads to another thing is handouts or no handouts.
it depends on the situation.
Okay.
If you need to share a lot of data,
Okay.
but you want to be providing them an overview of that data first, then
Yeah.
have the data and have that information in a handout
Okay.
and let them know, hey, I've got all the details that I'm referring to that I'm giving an overview of. I've got this in a handout. I'll be giving that to you here in a second. The way I would prefer to do it, you can't always get away with this, but the way I would prefer to do it is to have their attention on me for the overview because
Right.
you know what's going to happen if you give them the handout.
Exactly.
And I would tend to do the same thing. You give me a handout, I'm in it.
Right.
I'm reading it, especially if it's a a high risk situation or high potential situation. I'm excited about it. I'm
Right.
going to access that handout, and I'm not going to hear a word they're saying. I'm
Exactly.
reading this stuff. So
Yeah.
if you want the best focus, then keep their focus on you in a way that's not obnoxious. Because if you hand them the handout and then say, "Hey, don't look at that handout," that doesn't come across too well. But if
Right.
you say, "Hey, I want to give you some information and I'll be providing more details for you," that's a
Right.
very natural thing. You're not handing them something and then kind of taking it away from
Yeah.
them again by saying, don't read this stuff."
Yeah.
So there are things that you could do that help keep the audience focused where you need it to be while also making sure they have the information that they need.
Okay. Which also, I'm going to wear you out with all these questions before we get back to the overview. But it's like a lot of good stuff. I have to admit, I would be in presentation jail for a life sentence with all the mistakes that I've made over the years. Doing this. So that's why I have so many questions because I've
Oh,
done
that's
all this
good.
stuff.
That's good. That's good. As long as we're not making the same mistakes over and over again, we're continually making
Yeah.
progress.
Right. Exactly.
And a lot of this stuff is lessons I've had to learn the hard way and then discovered that people had written about it afterwards. So I wish
Right.
I'd have done more research on the beginning end myself to avoid some of the mistakes that I've made over the years.
So
Uh,
let's talk about
yeah.
questions on both sides. Number
All right.
one, we can all talk about injecting questions to the audience, but then the other part of this is, um, do we feel questions? I guess a lot of it depends on the size, the length, and all of that, but the intimacy. But is it better to field questions as we go, or is it better to say, hey, why don't you get a piece of paper, write down all your questions, and we'll talk about them at the end?
Some of that is a function of size. The smaller the group, the more naturally conversational something can be.
Okay.
Um, what I like to do is to present in a way that allows for questions along the way, but not at any time.
Okay.
And I don't state that. So occasionally I will have someone who raises their hand and ask a question, and most of the time I'll just answer it right then because that's
Right.
the easiest way to get back on track is provide that information and then move on. Every once in a while there'll be a question it's a good question, but it's concerning content that's coming in about 5 minutes.
Right. Right.
Even then use some wisdom
Yeah.
because you don't want to create a sense of frustration, but you also don't want to steal too much of the thunder of what's coming in
Yeah.
5 minutes. So you kind of have to make a judgment
Yeah.
call there. Some of it can be guided simply by the type of presence that you bring into the situation. So I usually don't have a lot of questions midstream, but I usually do at intervals say, all right, so we talked about this, and this. Any questions about that content before we move forward?
Yeah.
And then allow 10, 15 seconds of silence or so, which seems like forever,
Right.
but it's really not that long. And sometimes, well, quite often, I have to count it off slowly in my mind 1001, 1000 to make sure I'm providing that space for them to think about whether they have a question. and then to ask it if they do.
Yeah.
Because what you'll see happen a lot with presenters is because time passes differently in their mind, what happens to the audience is the presenter says, "Hey, anybody got any questions? Good. Okay, let's keep moving." Well, in their mind, they allowed 10 seconds, but in reality, it was more like a second and a half.
Right.
And that creates a sense of frustration from the audience because they're like, I didn't even get to think about whether I had a question or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a pretty much kind of my general guidelines. If I'm doing like 4 or 5 people, I usually say in the beginning, stop me. Let's have questions as we go, so we don't want you to forget, don't want you to get frustrated. But if we got 20, 25 people, my instructions at the beginning are usually, hey, get a piece of paper. You're going to have questions, probably write them down. If I don't answer them, as this presentation goes further, then we can talk about them at the end. So I just think it's nice to kind of set that up from the beginning, especially if you're going to ask them to take notes and hold them to the end. At least they're prepared and they don't get frustrated like, hey, is this guy ever going to be quiet long enough for me to get this question in here?
Yeah, that's true. And so much does depend on the purpose of your message.
Yeah.
So some of what you're talking about would tend to be more applicable if we're in a teaching type setting. A lot of business presentations, they're providing an update or they're asking for permission to go in a certain direction, which is kind of a sales type of approach to presenting information, or they may be directly selling a product to an organization. And in those cases, the audience has a lot more power.
Yeah.
And so it would be more natural for someone to maybe even interrupt and say, hey, what about this? I need to clarify this before we move on. It's a different dynamic.
Right.
And of course, in some high pressure, very time pressured situations, a presenter may realize pretty quickly that they're going to go into this presentation realizing that what was supposed to have been allowed 7 minutes is cut off at 2 because someone in the audience who has the authority says, that's enough. We need to move on. We got what we need. And then your other 5 minutes is just gone.
Right.
And as soon as you know that might be the situation, then you realize you need to front load your presentation with the most important information there,
right,
just in case you end up getting cut off. So a lot of this thought about questions and when they happen is going to be somewhat determined by the nature of the presentation and therefore the nature of the audience and how much they feel empowered, which if they're all your bosses, they feel pretty empowered to jump in and ask a question or interrupt the process entirely.
Right. So on the flip side of that, what about asking audience questions? And, again, I'm sure it's situational, but is that opening up a place we don't want to go? Is it good practice to try to keep that engagement? What are your feelings on that?
Be careful and be willing to learn from your experience. Be careful what you ask for. I mean, there are times when you could see in a presenter's eyes, they asked a question, people started answering it, and then they're wishing they would have never asked that question. But they did, and now they have to deal with all the emotions or frustrations or even just the sheer amount of information that's coming at them because of the question that they answered. So some of that is going to be determined by how well you know your audience and what the purpose of that question is. In a training setting, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
To ask a question that gets them thinking along a certain lines, or maybe even having them with 2 or 3 people around them discuss the answer to a question and then see how all the different groups are addressing that question, which gives you a trainer an idea of where they're coming from and can guide your approach to that topic. So yeah, be careful. Questions can be powerful, but questions can also get you in trouble pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction in the training or instructional environment. Probably not as detrimental as if you're doing a sales presentation and Have you ever seen anything like this? Well, yeah, we got one and we got a lot cheaper than this. Oh, okay.
Yep.
That's
Right.
when you
Yes.
go from 7 minutes to two. It's like, okay, thank you, we've heard enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, be careful. Be careful with the questions that you ask.
Okay.
That's good. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that.
All right. I'm sorry. I interrupted you 25 times in there.
No, this
We were
is
talking
good.
about stepping back from the screen. What are some other good overview tips?
So let's talk about transitions
Okay.
between slides. That's another area where early on people would just go crazy
Oh my gosh.
with the transitions just because they could. They're like, oh, look at this, man. I can make the whole thing swirl and ripple and explode. And
And we did a different one between every slide just so I
right,
could show
yes.
you that I saw that button on there. So never did the
Right. And what's what's good about a lot of the content that we're talking about today is that the guidelines we're sharing make life easier for you.
right.
So we're going to say how big is a font? Well, if you stay between the 28 and 44 size font, you're probably going to be okay.
Right.
And with transitions, if you use either a simple crossfade or no transition at all,
Right.
and be consistent
Right.
with the transitions that you use, then that makes life easier for you because you can most presentation software you can go over into your thumbnails of the slides, hit Control A, and apply no transition to everything, and you're done.
Right.
You're not having to worry about, well, how many times have I used the swirl transition? Is it time? No, you don't have to use it at all.
Right.
As a
Right.
general rule, you'll be okay using either a simple crossfade or no transition at all. That makes life easier for you, and it's actually more effective because people aren't distracted by the transition.
Right. And it's just one more thing, my opinion too. While it can be cool and useful, it's just one more thing that can go wrong.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that kind of leads it to my next question is, what about transition between bullet points? Because at one time there was a
There we
thinking, I
go.
got
Right.
5 bullet points. We put up number one, we discuss, then we, hit the button, and what it does, it makes number two kind of fall in
Right.
some
Yeah.
way. Good.
Yeah.
Is that good, bad, indifferent?
Um, that's good. I would say that's good. I would say that the same rule applies here. You want it to be simple. You don't want all the letters tumbling in one at a time. If the whole, whatever the next line is or next bullet is, appears all at once,
Okay.
or fades in quickly,
Yeah.
that's ideal because that's not a distraction to the message. You want to keep the focus on the message itself. Um, and there is value in revealing what the next point is as you say it.
Yeah.
Because, like providing the handout to everybody,
Yeah.
if you put the entire however much information you have on the screen up there all at once, they're going to read it a lot faster than you can address it.
Yeah.
And two things happen there. One is while they're reading it, they're not listening to you because they have to choose. Am I going to read what's on the slide or am I going to listen to you? Well,
Right.
if it's just a simple concept with not many words, they can glance at that and get back to you no problem at all.
Yeah.
But if you put multiple bullets up there all at once, they're going to read through it. And not only do they know where you're at right now, they know where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then there may be even a sense of impatience, like, when are you going to get to that
Right.
third bullet there? You've been on this first bullet for 2
Yeah.
minutes now. What? And so it creates a distraction
Yeah.
for the audience.
Yeah. And I've even seen where the fourth point really hit somebody hard, and so instead of listening to 1, 2, and 3, they're frothing at the mouth
There we
because
go.
they're waiting for you to get to 4 because they're going to jump. They're going to jump in there and say something, so they've
Yes.
totally missed anything that you said prior to that.
Oh, that's good. That's a great point. Or that fourth bullet may have reminded them of a story or reminded them of something that's on their to-do list that they forgot to record. So they're breaking out their phone. And so, yeah, you gotta be careful. So it's best to keep the audience with you as much as possible.
Yeah.
Don't be showing them the whole, where you're going for the whole next 5 minutes. Where are
Right.
we at right now? Let's keep the focus on where we're at right now. And you can do that with the way that you reveal different bullets. But once again, remember, you don't want a lot of bullets on screen. Like I try to not have more than three
Oh, okay.
up on the screen at the same time. That also gives me the freedom to use larger fonts,
Yeah.
because I'm trying to keep a bullet to I don't know 3 to 7 words or something like that, and not have more than three on a screen. If I need any bullets at all, if a picture does the work better, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about connecting your audience to the message. What works best?
Yeah. And again, I know a lot of this stuff is dictated by the message, what we're doing, where we're doing it, and all that. But uh, is there a good length, like, if we start getting into 30, 40, 50, 60 slides? I mean, at some point is like, oh my gosh, can somebody just put me out of my
Right.
misery? So is there a
Yeah.
good target that we want to try to shoot for, when possible?
Wow. That I know this is a frustrating answer, but it so much depends on the purpose of your message. Um, some people try to put way too much content on a single slide, and it's frustrating for the audience. The good news for them is there's an infinite number of slides available.
Right.
It can be as long as you need for it to be. But then the question becomes, what do you really need
Right.
for it to be? Um, if you're moving too quickly through slides, that creates a sense of frustration for your audience,
Yeah.
especially if there's more content on the slide than you're even addressing because you're trying to move too fast. And you've probably seen this happen with presentations. I know I have, where someone was trying to cram too much information into a presentation. So the last 10 minutes, they're talking 90 to nothing because they're trying to end on time, but they feel like they have to get through every slide,
Right.
which sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
If the audience doesn't have the slide deck in front of them and there are pieces of content that you can live without, it might be better for you to skip those pieces of content. And there's ways to do that that the audience never knows that you skip that piece of content. You could do that fluidly. It's
Okay.
just a matter of learning how to use your software. So the number of slides, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and how much time you have within to accomplish it. I would say that if you're staying on a slide, wow, if you're staying on a slide for less than a minute, then you should probably question whether or not you have paced your presentation appropriately.
Yeah.
Especially if there's multiple points on a slide that you're having to discuss.
Yeah.
But once again, that's a general rule. It depends on the situation that you're in and the kind of information that you're having to share with them. Um, but yeah, it is easy for people to get carried away
Right.
and have way too many slides, and they create frustration for their audience as they do so.
Yeah. And what about you mentioned, that silence. What about a silence as a punctuation, as when sometimes when we speak, there's some people are scared. They're like, oh, I can't have any silence. But, you read a lot about that. Sometimes taking a breath is a good point of emphasis. So, as
Yeah.
we put up a picture, is it okay? Just a moment of
Right.
silence to let people take in what they're seeing without feeling like
Yes.
we've got to fill all this space with words all the time.
You are right. You are right on the money there. That is good. And that would apply not only to an image that would challenge people to think, it could also apply to perhaps a quote that you've put on the screen.
Yeah.
And maybe you put it up there, and maybe you verbalize that quote. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just let it sink in
No.
and let them read it and think about what it's saying and how it applies to them. And those times of silence, well, they create a variation that helps maintain engagement.
All right.
If things are too predictable, and if the speaker keeps using the same intonation through, and people check it out, the people check out, mentally check out. But when there are differences, pauses or increases in volume or decreases in volume that are not a part of a just overall predictable pattern, that helps people stay engaged in the presentation overall.
Yeah.
So yeah, that moment of silence could be a part of what creates a sense of interest engagement in
Yeah.
the audience.
Yeah, because what I've seen before is, if you're talking along, and somebody's maybe they're down writing notes or, thinking about, like you said, what they need from the grocery store on their way home. Sometimes that pause, it gets there because they're like, uh-oh, did this thing
What's
just
going
end?
on?
Yeah, so that you kind of get them to look back up and kind of re-engage sometimes.
Yes, I've done that many times,
Yeah,
especially when I was having to facilitate a training that was longer than ideal.
right.
So if you've got an all-day training, after the first 2 hours, you've got to struggle the next 6 hours of that training,
Yeah.
And it's a struggle for the presenter to keep their energy up. It's a struggle for the audience to stay engaged. So
Right.
anything you can do that creates that moment of, oh, what's going on, is
Yeah.
like a mental reset,
Yeah.
because there's a little bit of energy that comes along with, wait, what's going on,
Right. Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
maybe hold,
They
engage
asked,
them.
did that guy just ask me a question and I wasn't
Yeah,
paying
wait, what?
attention?
I like
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
So you mentioned a quote. So that's something, sites, references, back in the old days, at the end, if we had to cite a lot of dates, cite a lot of other works, put the
Right.
references at the end on a slide. Uh, Sometimes I've seen them on that slide with it. Any
Yeah.
hard and fast rules on that, or just as long as they give the credit where credit's due?
I like to put it on the slide,
Okay.
and it doesn't have to be big. It may be where you have to look to see it, but oh, there it is. There's a reference.
Yeah.
And that creates more respect for you as a presenter, that you are citing your sources. That's good. That means you're doing your homework. A similar thing would be true for images that you use, video clips that you use. First of all, you need to make sure you have permission to use those.
Right.
And secondly, when you do, you cite that source.
Yeah.
So even in my blogs, ones that aren't my images, you'll see in the bottom right hand corner of the image itself, uh, in a kind of contrasting color font, where that image came from.
Yeah.
Just as a way of honoring those who created that image. So that's the way I like to do it. I like to do it right there on the slide. If you do it at the end, then there may be people who are wondering the whole time, so where did this come from? Did they have permission? But you put it right there, then
Yeah.
it alleviates that distraction immediately.
Yeah. It's a little different situation, but if your presentation, it may eventually end up living online, that
Right.
picture, the image issue is a lot bigger than people think. And I'll just, a quick story that I, had a person I knew that, she managed a website for her company, and she just pulled pictures off the internet and popped them up there, and for years and years, not really thinking much about it. And then, one day the company gets a bill in the mail from Getty Images for about $800. Like, here, thanks for using our images. Now here's the bill for that. So
Right. Yeah.
just the point is that sometimes we think, oh, we'll just slide this image in. It's going to be on presentation. Nobody's going to see it but my audience. And then this thing ends up living online somewhere. And then the person who
Right.
owns that image finds it. So like you said, it's better just to,
Yes.
make sure you have the permission to use that.
Right. And there are easily accessible sources of free images that are good images.
Right.
So
Yeah.
doing this does not have to cost you a lot of money. It's
Yeah.
more of an ethical credibility issue to make sure that you have permission to use the images that you use, realizing that there are people who put great images out there for free. Now,
Right.
sometimes I just end up having to pay for an image because there's nothing that matches.
Yeah.
There's nothing that accomplishes what I want to accomplish that's found on those resources.
Right.
But
Right.
most of the time, I
Yeah.
can find what I need there.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't want to get off in the weeds on that too much, but there are a lot of reasonable sites. I can't remember.
Right, yeah.
They were acquired by Adobe, but I mean, I used to pay like $15 a month, and it was a great,
Yeah.
a great selection of all kinds of images, some cartoonish, but some real people. And then also
Right.
we kind of can mention, again, this is one of my things is, that's where if you can fit an image that you take that fits with the subject matter, much better. Because
Right.
I like to see, especially if I'm in a presentation for a product, I want to see your equipment, your
Oh, there you
stuff.
go.
I don't want to
Okay.
see a
Yeah.
stock picture of, here's a really cool delivery truck, but yeah, I don't know who that belongs. It's not
Right.
one of
Yeah.
your trucks, or, it's not your
Yeah.
people. So anyway, that's
I
again,
like that. Yeah.
yeah,
And another thing to keep in mind there is making sure that those images are high quality.
yes. All right.
Um, and and that they are being saved and used in ways that protect that quality,
Right.
because you could lose some credibility if an image is what I call bitmappy. It looks,
Right.
you can see the pixels in
Yeah.
it and
Yeah.
stuff, and so you
Yeah.
want to avoid that. But I mean, nowadays, most of the time, even the pictures we take with our phone are great resolution.
Right.
So then it's just a matter of, did we frame it well? Does
Yeah.
it look good? um, Now that leads into another interesting topic that has to do with our visuals, and that is, how up to date do our visuals look? Uh, how up to date does our slide deck look?
Yeah.
Because I bet you at a glance could look at a slide deck and think, I bet that was made in 2003,
Right. Yeah.
because of the types of graphics that were used, because it was more boxy than widescreen.
Yeah.
You could just glance at it and see. And I've seen presentations where people are they are promoting a modern product, and they're talking in terms of technology, but the layout of their presentation and the
Yeah.
types of images that they're using look old.
Yeah. Oh,
And
you
so
can see
people are
the
going to discount that this isn't a new technology, because it can't be. It looks like 2003.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the digital dust on the slides as they're going through the.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. I like
No,
that.
no, no. It's like in 2000 we came out with the the G3000, and so over time now we're on the G8000, but all we've done is gone back and changed the 1000 to the 2000 to
Yeah.
3000, but everything else is basically still the same.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the image that we used was black and white with the Edsel in the background.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Yeah,
That's
right,
not going to help you move that product.
right,
So make sure that your slide design matches
right.
the image that you want to portray to
Yeah,
the customer. And if you want it to be modern, make sure that the um, what am I thinking of? There's a word for it. I just lost it. Um, whether it's more boxy or widescreen
yeah,
is appropriate. The types of fonts that you're using are appropriate.
right,
Whether you're using something that looks more clip art or more image based is appropriate
right.
for your goal.
Yeah,
Aspect ratio, that's what I was trying to think of,
yeah,
is the
yeah,
aspect
yeah,
ratio of your design.
yeah.
Is it appropriate for the message you're wanting to send?
I just had this last night. I was messing around with an image that I created. It wasn't a picture, but just something that I put together on Canva, and it was in a certain aspect ratio, and I needed it in a different one, and so I just pull the corner and drug it out. But when it did, it became very blurry, and you talked a
Oh
little bit about that
yeah,
earlier about
yeah.
the image quality and not messing that up. But it's easy to do, and not all images, stretch or move
Right.
equally, and they can get, if it's a square and you try to make it a rectangle, it can get very distorted. So those are things that we
Right.
just need to pay attention to. Even though they've got the box and it is rearrangeable, it doesn't always mean that it works out when we get it to the point we need it at.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, a lot of images, it would be better to use the crop function rather than just the drag function,
Right,
which means you're going to lose part of the image, but it's not going to be stretched or distorted
right,
when
right.
you do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to do anything that makes people think this person doesn't know what they're doing with this
Right,
with this
right.
software.
Yeah, exactly. One more thing. I know we're running way late. We could talk about this for the next 2 or 3 hours, but themes, backgrounds,
Okay.
where
Yeah,
do
yeah.
we land on that? I mean, again, we can do too little and we can be way too
Right.
crazy.
Yes, yes. Well, we referred earlier to how we went from like one extreme to another.
Right.
When all these options came out, people were going crazy with it, and then other people were saying, well, all you need is black background, white font, or the opposite of that. Um, and you rightfully recognize the reality for most people somewhere in the middle.
Right.
I think it's hard to go wrong with keeping it simple,
Yeah.
but that does not mean it has to be black with a white font.
Right.
You can incorporate the organizational branding into that process. And a lot of organizations, they have well-designed templates that do just that. The
Right.
background's going to be a certain color, the font's going to be a certain color. It's all going to make sense with the branding. A common mistake that's made even now with presentations is feeling like the company logo needs to be on every slide. It doesn't. Or feeling like the name of the presentation needs to be on every slide. It doesn't. And that creates visual clutter
Right.
on the slide. Now, if you're working for an organization that's part of the template and you're required to use the template, just roll with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you got to work with. But if you have total control, you want to keep it as simple as possible
Yeah.
with the colors that are used. Now it's super easy in the presentation software to use the little eyedropper icon. You could pull your company's logo in and just use that eyedropper thing to choose the color of your font so that it is one of the colors in your logo. Choose the background color so it is one of the colors in your logo. You do want to make sure that the contrast is good, because if the color of the font's too close to the color of the background, it's not going to be easily readable unless you outline it in a
Right.
contrasting color. You want to make sure everything is still readable, but just realize you're not locked into a black and white presentation in order for it to have that type of simplicity. You can
Right.
have that type of simplicity and still be matching the branding of your organization in ways that communicate well.
Yeah, and if you work for a large enough organization, if you check with them, like you said, they may have a template already put together, but also too, the logos and images that you may need, they may have them, because again, I've seen somebody go to a website, clip a logo off, and it just doesn't it doesn't
Yes.
translate as
Right.
crisp and clean as what they had hoped, and it was like, well, that was just the last ditch effort. But
Right.
a lot of companies have image banks where like all of their
Right.
stuff in different sizes because they have certain color use. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot that
Yeah.
goes into that somebody like myself doesn't really realize, but there's somebody behind the scenes that has put a lot of thought into that. This is green number 1 and this is blue number 12, and
Right.
all these things because of the way that they go together good, which I understand. I'm just saying, be careful and be respectful of your company, because that's you don't want to,
Yeah.
if you're doing a presentation for the C-suite and you've cobbled together something that's out of bounds, you don't want your message to get lost because the guy's sitting there like, that is not our logo.
Right. Yeah. 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 So I think you benefit in a couple of ways. If you're willing to check out and see what templates are available, your product's probably going to look a lot better because you did that.
Yeah.
And secondly, the organization is going to appreciate you
Yeah.
because they put a lot of time and effort into creating these templates and creating these high resolution logos so that your presentation
Yeah.
can look good. So we'd encourage, all listeners, man, if you work for a big company, make sure that you're honoring the templates that they've spent so much time and money preparing
Yeah.
for you to use.
Right. Because the other thing, it's sometimes we have a simplistic approach that me and you are the only two people that are ever going to see this, and that's not always true. I mean, maybe
Right.
maybe it's so awesome that somebody wants to take this and show it to somebody else outside of the company. And so that representation, we just need to make sure that we are
Ooh, yeah.
representing our company in the very best possible way, and not be like, that was a great presentation, but the aesthetics of it were so terrible that I'm embarrassed to share it with somebody outside of our
Right.
organization because it looks so bad.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, I know we are way over, Mike. I appreciate your patience. The other thing, just before we go, I was going to ask you, is there any more, larger global points that you wanted to get? And I promise I won't ask any questions. I'll just let you come out there.
No, I don't think so. I think just going back to what we acknowledged at the beginning, making sure that you know your message, know your audience, and make the connection, and that whatever visuals you use make perfect sense given that process. They support your message. They are not a substitute for it.
Yeah, and we couldn't cover everything. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to recommend that y'all go pick up Big Presentations in Small Rooms by Michael Gibson. It's a good read, well worth it. It'll put you on the right track. And then I'm going to also give you a chance to put some information out there in just a minute. But before I ask you that, what is a tool or a habit that you use in your life? Could be professional, personal, but what is something that you do that adds a lot of value?
One thing that I've learned recently that's been so helpful for me is the limits of focused time. And I learned that from a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it took some pressure off of me. I used to feel like my ability to create and produce product was more of a self-discipline issue than it actually is. And I'm kind of wired in ways that I want to do things right. I want to get things done. Um, and that actually can be hurtful and unhelpful for me when you have the wrong mindset. So I was thinking, for me to get stuff done, I just need to put my head down and focus and I can get it done. And if I'm struggling, it's because I don't have enough self-discipline. And that's actually not
Right,
true.
right.
There are mental limits on focus. And for most people, it's around 2 hours.
Hmm.
If you work out that muscle, because it's kind of like a muscle, if you work out that muscle, get in really good shape, you might be able to stretch it to around 4 hours. Me realizing that helped me structure my days in ways that would protect that focus time. And I'm wired to be more of a morning person with that type of work. So when I was writing the book, I would protect the morning hours from like 5:30 to 8:30, somewhere in that time frame where there's no distractions, and I was able to get a lot more done in less time, and take pressure off of myself.
Right, right.
It wasn't going to do me any good to sit there for 8 hours.
Yeah,
I was just going to be staring at the screen because my brain was gone
yeah,
by
right.
that time. So maybe that'll be helpful for some of our listeners. Realize that your ability to think creatively or analyze data, it has limits
Yeah.
on it. So don't beat yourself up trying to uh, go beyond what you're physically able to do, mentally able to do. Instead, plan around it and protect those times.
Yeah, and it's so, like myself, you bump into this, whether it's creative or problem solving, and it's like, just can't get it. Sometimes, because I'm like you, used to it'd be like, okay, I just need to think harder, think longer, think different. Yes, but now what I've realized is just getting up, taking a break, taking a little walk, even if it's just walking around the house for 5 minutes. So you
Yeah.
can come back and have so much more clarity than
Yeah.
before for me, anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right. So many of my best ideas have come after I've done a lot of research, set it aside, and went for a long walk.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you
Yeah, we
glad
need
you
we need to
brought
be
that up.
kind to ourselves. I think that's one place a lot of a lot of business people are really hard on themselves, and we just need to say, hey, you know what, we're humans, and I think like your suggestion is, we need to figure out we're a morning person, evening person, set aside those blocks of taking those harder tasks when we are at our best, and
Yeah.
that's self realization. We have to think about when are we best, when are we clear, getting our sleep and everything like that. So
Right. Yeah, you're
pre-
right.
appreciate that very much. So Mike, tell everybody, number one, how can we get the book? And
Okay.
number two, how can they reach out, get a hold of you? Who do you like to work with? Somebody
Okay.
needs
Yes.
you to help them with the presentation, or if maybe even somebody needs some training, would like for you to come in and do that for them.
Yes. Yes. Well, you can get the book at Amazon. You can get it in ebook format, in print, or audiobook. Any one of those options are available at Amazon. If you just search for Big Presentations in Small Rooms on Amazon, it'll pull that up. You can get that there. If you like to listen, um, we have a podcast, and we have a lot of fun with that podcast, my host and we just tackle these different subjects. We laugh a lot. We share a lot of stories. And that's available pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. So if you search for the Big Presentations podcast, you can find a lot of helpful information there that I think you will enjoy listening to. If you're looking for an encouraging community, there is a Facebook group called the Workplace Presentations Hub. And it's a place where content is released, where people can ask questions and receive encouragement. And it's focused on those who, their work involves making presentations. If you're interested in booking trainings, throughout the years, I have had to tackle many different subjects in a training format. You can find a list of those at mrgpresentations.com. Once again, that's mrgpresentations.com for a list of trainings available. And there are links there where you can contact me if you would like help, especially if you'd like help for presentation design or coaching for presentations. You can find links there. If you enjoy reading and read the book and want to read even more, there's a blog at bigpresentations.com. You can also ask for help through that site as well. So there's multiple ways that you can contact me. I am on Facebook and I am on LinkedIn. You could just search my name, Michael Gibson, or search Big Presentations in Small Rooms. You could find me there as well. And I post quite a bit, helpful tips and hints and encouragement. You'll find stuff from me daily on social media that can be helpful and encouraging for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. We certainly do appreciate it. Again, reach out because there's so much that we didn't cover. We would have liked to, but it's just, there's so many intricacies and there's so much to do with presentations. And then it's who we're presenting to, what the information is, so many variables. So reach out to Mike, let him give you a helping hand and have the best presentation you can get. It makes a world of difference, because if you stand up and struggle with one presentation, you'll never want to do it again. And there's such a powerful way to deliver information if we can just, get it right. And we're not going to always be perfect, but we cannot embarrass ourselves. We'll put it that way.
There is help out here. You can
yes,
get it.
there is. Yes, there is. All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, I am your host, Roy. You can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you use, please reach out. I'd be glad to get us added where you can listen easier. Also, we are on all the major social media platforms, probably hang out a little bit more on Instagram. I am very picture and visual focused, so that's kind of where I like to go. Also, a video of this interview will go up when it goes live. You can find that over at our YouTube channel. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.